All right, so how do we love our neighbor in these trying times and yet stay safe? What about people who are homeless and they're kind of living on the margins, and it's harder to get close to them, it's harder to meet their needs, and yet there's more of them than ever before, and people are losing homes and finding themselves disenfranchised, and who's taking care of them, who's loving them? Well, I'll tell you, one person, Richard Bahr, is, and he's been doing this for a long time, and he's my guest on our line right now. Richard, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me back, Bill.
So I understand this is your fifth Zoom call today?
It is my fifth Zoom call today. This is the only one where the person hosting the meeting looks this good.
You must be looking at Rebecca, not me.
I'm not looking at Rebecca's name, actually.
Okay, good. That would make sense. Well, it's interesting because we are now faced in such a difficult situation where people are sheltering in. What about people that don't have homes? Where are they sheltering in?
Yeah, the whole idea of the stay-at-home order, to me, when I heard the governor announce that, I mean, with the work that we do, it was just dripping with irony for me, because the first thing I thought of was that, well, what if you don't have a home?
Right.
Like, where do you stay?
Right.
You know? Yeah. So, and actually, I have to commend the state, the county. There's a lot of tireless workers in the social service system that care for the homeless, the shelters, that have done a really nice job of pivoting, adjusting, accommodating, within the assets and the time that they've had to deal with it.
Yeah. Now, Richard, people are feeling apprehension about approaching people they know and love and care about and see all the time. I mean, we're keeping our social 6 feet distance from each other. But what about when you're trying to have an encounter with a homeless person?
Yeah, that's a little bit worrisome, isn't it?
Well,
with somebody that's unknown.
Yeah, you're in the trenches every day. You've been serving breakfast to the homeless for years and years now. So how is that going, and what is that like, and are you able to continue that?
We are, yeah. So lots of changes. So we are, Salvation Army Harbor Light has been a great partner of ours. They allow us to cook in their kitchen, use their cafeteria to serve over 100 meals a day. So over the last month or so, we have adapted to kitting, Kitting, kitting our breakfasts into lunch sacks in paper cups, like a to-go cup you would have for soup. Yep. Sugar, salt packets, spoons, coffee. And then we serve out the front of their chapel, out a door. We've got a couple of tables set up that creates a barrier to provide the social distance for our servers. So that we really only have one person that has limited contact with the guests that we have. The rest of the people are back inside. Everybody is washed, gloved, and masked before we prepare the food, so that we don't do any harm to our guests.
And Richard, that is the kind of the antithesis of how you normally operate, because you're usually among them serving breakfast, throwing your arm around someone, giving someone who needs a hug, and you're a high contact person. So this has been a strain and a relearning for you as well, hasn't it?
Yeah, for me personally, it really breaks my heart.
So when you get one of these kits, and I bet some of these people just think this is just a lifesaver, because they're getting sandwiches and they're getting some hygiene stuff, and in the midst of feeling not only alone and homeless, but this is a chance for them to feel like someone really cares about them.
I think so. I mean, I was there, again this morning, and I mean, there hasn't been a day that's gone by where there haven't been a couple of people that have told me that, God bless you and the folks for being here, and thank you so much for continuing to show up. And we know how difficult this must be, and homeless people are just like the rest of the population. There are angry and impatient people, just like there are when we go shopping, right? So
yeah, totally.
There are a few of those as well. But I'm heartened by the fact that people are so gracious and thankful and recognize, because it's important for our volunteers to know, because this is a big change. So to get that feedback is really meaningful to them.
Yeah. And how has that affected your volunteers? Has everyone continued to stay on board and just wear the masks and the gloves and keep the distance, or have you lost some volunteers?
We've got about 40 volunteers regularly that cycle through to serve every day. And I think about 7 of them have benched themselves for their reasons.
Sure.
And so it's left some gaps. So there's been a few people, including me and some others, that have stepped in those gaps and picked up more days to be able to be sure that we've got full teams on board. But we've given people the option, and we've received guidance from healthcare professionals about, if people exhibit symptoms, to don't come. And we've had people review our protocols. So we're doing everything the best way that we know possible.
Mm-hmm. And what are some of the things that you've learned since this pandemic has broken out?
I hate tiny little cups.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah. Trying to scoop hot oatmeal or grits in there while you're holding it in a glove. If you get it stuck to your glove, it doesn't come off. So it just creates a burn.
Yeah. But some of the stories from some of the the people that you're doing ministry with on the streets. Yeah,
it's interesting. There's been a whole kind of a different crowd. It isn't so many of the people coming out of the shelter because they can't go back in if they come out to get our breakfast. So it's been a number of people from like the bus station that have been coming through. I had a long conversation with a fellow on Sunday, I think on Easter. Last Friday, that had just gotten out of prison and was on his way to Sioux Falls, I think, to a halfway house.
Yeah.
He had been in prison in Oklahoma, and it was just a really great, heartwarming conversation. He's a guy that's searching, and we kind of threw him a lifeline. So it was great to just connect with him. So there's lots of people like that we encounter now that we didn't see before.
Yeah, no, I think the question I was maybe getting at is, what are you learning from people on the street in terms of they're not sitting around watching CNN all day?
Yeah, I know you're asking me that. I just dodged your question.
Oh, that's good. I mean, if you are homeless and you don't sit around and watch TV, you may not even be aware of what's going on to some degree.
Yeah, there seems to be just a slight lag. I mean, understand that many homeless people do have mobile phones. They do keep up on the news.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little more difficult because the libraries are closed. A lot of those folks in that population count on the libraries to use the computers to get caught up on things. But many of them have phones, so they're mostly caught up. But I do notice when a new executive order comes out from the governor or some new information or protocol changes come, there's a little bit of a lag in information.
Mm-hmm. So when you are meeting people, are you finding that there's more interest in them hearing about God, or are they just more interested in another meal or a new pair of socks? Is there any new hunger even amongst the homeless people for faith?
Boy, I don't know how you gauge that.
Yeah.
I know for me personally, I mean, you're right. I'm a hugger. I'm a high contact guy. I sit, I look people in the eye.
I know you are.
Now I'm looking over the top of a mask.
Right.
With somebody that's got both their hands full, one with coffee, one with a cup, and trying to figure out where to set this bag. And it doesn't create the warmest environment to have those conversations. But I guess what I continue to hold out hope for is that, situations like this are great for revival, to bring people back to God. We've seen that over and over and over where there's been kind of global world tragedies. You can think about even in our own lifetimes, like 9/11. And so I continue to just think that our job as disciples is to continue to be faithful and to show up. And it might be that one conversation with that guy that just got out of prison, or it might be one other remarkable thing that could be the entire reason that we were there.
Yeah, and that's making all the difference, because this is, I've always said there's nothing inconsequential in God's economy. Even if it's a brief meeting you have with a guy that gets out of a prison in Oklahoma on his way to a halfway house, your small encounter with him, you just really never know in light of eternity how that will have impacted him and how the Holy Spirit will prompt that conversation back into his mind and his heart at some time down the road.
Well, and you think of your own testimony, I think of my testimony, you think of the people that God placed in our path that just sowed those seeds. And that's always our great hope is that, we're farmers, I mean, we're sowing seeds in people's lives. And I mean, it's super awesome to be on the spot where somebody says, how do I get to heaven? What do I got to do? I'm fed up. I mean, it's an honor and a privilege to be that person in that spot, but you can count on it that there were countless people before you, that sowed those seeds.
Mm-hmm. And I just love the power of a personal testimony. And Richard, I'd love for you to tell our listeners, before we go to break, a little bit about your story.
Oh, geez, a little bit before break. So great family growing up. Somehow my life went sideways. I became caught up in addiction in drugs and alcohol as a teenager. Entered recovery early in life. Was married. Had a couple of young children. I had surrendered the drugs and alcohol, but I hadn't surrendered everything in my life. And so some of the other parts of everything came back in force in my life, and ended that marriage, caused me to move into a bit of a spiral in my life where even my housing was somewhat in question at the time. And found a church, found a great woman in Carla, and we married. And so we've been attending the church and been faithful for it's been 20 years now since I actually attempted to turn everything over, all the rest of that junk. And my friend Dave showed up and started serving oatmeal one day down at Salvation Army, and I just showed up to help him. Mm-hmm. And God ruined my plans at that point, but he improved my life.
Yeah, talk about that surrender piece, because that's something I think we all need to examine. How good are we at doing this surrender? I think that's a hard word for people to process.
Yeah, well, I guess in my experience, it's never absolute. We continue to take things back, so it's a process we have to continue to work at. But certainly there are pivotal moments in my life where I can mark the moment and say, yeah, I was sick and tired of being sick and tired about that thing, and mm-hmm. was ready to give it over. But yeah, I mean, that I've got a background in recovery, and I love some of the traditional 12-step programs. I mean, they saved my life at the time. I just needed more, and where they fell short for me at the time, without Jesus as my higher power, my named higher power, there were things that I still kept hidden, things that I had revealed to everybody, and things that were my secrets, and those were the things that brought me down.
Well, I appreciate that honesty, because that is exactly where a lot of people struggle with. They want to surrender, but they hold back some of the things that they don't want to let go of.
Yeah, it's difficult, and pain is probably the best motivator for that.
Mm-hmm. And you've written a book called Those People, and you share stories about your homeless friends and people who you have encountered in your ministry, which I find fascinating, and I'd love to maybe hear a story or two about that when we come back. Richard Bahr is my guest. You can go to his website, richardbahr.com, and we'll take 90 seconds and bring back Richard. All right, we're back with Richard Bahr. Appreciate Richard very much. He's got a ministry serving the homeless, and he does it all the time. And God got his attention many, many, many years ago, and you just do the next right thing, Richard. And I know you and your wife, Carla, are very committed to this, and you're reaching a lot of people for the Lord too through all this. So, way to go!
Well, we are, I would say, probably the great benefactors of the whole process. We're hopeful. I guess I call people. I hope there's collateral help that's caused, but I feel like most of the ministry work that we do, that God's speaking to me about things that I need to deal with.
Yeah, say more about that. That's very interesting.
Well, for instance, you mentioned the last book that I wrote, Those People, and that came about from, countless accounts of people that I've made friends with and known in the homeless community, and people that have been recently homeless, and just noticing the deep and rich character that many of them had. And I'm embarrassed to say that I was surprised. People that exhibited great faith, people that had were super grateful, had tremendous patience. I think about my one friend who exhibited great love. He was an older fellow on Social Security, living in a homeless shelter, and I tried, and he's had 2 school-age kids from he wasn't married to their mother. And I didn't understand why he was there. It's like he had the means to live somewhere else. And long story short, as over months and almost a few years of conversations, what became clear to me was that he lived there by choice because the children's mother had a critical illness, was unable to work, and that if he lived and he couldn't live there, and there was a variety of reasons for that, but he chose to live in a homeless shelter so that he could provide the majority of that check to care for his kids.
Wow.
And I asked myself the question, I mean, I have 4 kids of my own. Would I be willing to live in a homeless shelter so that I could provide for my kids? And as I asked myself that question, I don't know that I want to answer that question.
I get it. But let me just tell my listeners, here's kind of the way you operate, because you're very fearless, and I know you're a cautious guy as well, but you really are fearless. I mean, I might roll my window down at a stoplight when someone's asking for money, hand them some cash and say, God bless, and you will roll your window down, ask them their name, and eventually invite them to your house for Thanksgiving dinner. This is where you and I differ.
Yeah, well, there could be a stretch of time between those two events.
No, there will be a stretch of time, but I know for a fact that you, on Thanksgiving, for example, you've got, a whole number of people in your home having dinner with you, and they're largely people you met on the street.
I mean, it kind of cycles from year to year who's there, but yeah, every single year we do that, and then we do kind of an eclectic Christmas thing too on Christmas Eve where we do something similar. So
yeah, so talk to the listeners about just the fears they might have interacting with people, because a lot of people when they're homeless, they frighten people. Let's be honest.
Yeah, and I think first of all, and I have had people talk to me about that, especially the whole thing about dealing with panhandlers. We talk about that in the book, and I wouldn't ever encourage anybody to step beyond maybe their own fear tolerance that God provides.
Right.
And we all have our different thresholds for that, whether you're a man or a woman. But I think there's a tension between that and the challenge that's laid on our heart when we're prompted to try to step into something. And anybody listening to this program, that they know exactly what I'm talking about. And how to deal with the tension between the awkwardness, uncomfortableness, and maybe even verging on fear versus the prompting to step into a need for somebody. And so that's the constant struggle. I struggle with it on a daily basis. It doesn't go away. I mean, but it's something that we all have to make our own decisions for in that moment, prayerfully, about what's our next move going to be.
Mm-hmm.
I make tons of mistakes. I make tons of mistakes with this. There are times I step into things and I'm like, well,
yeah,
maybe I shouldn't be back here. And there's times that I walk away from something and I'm like, oh man, I think I just blew it.
Yeah. How do we have the discernment, Richard, to know the difference between someone who really is in need and someone who's being manipulative just to get some money to buy some drugs later that night?
So that's an impossible question to answer.
I get it.
Yeah.
But, I mean, sometimes there's props that you go, okay, here's a constructed sign that has a lot of detail on it about all the bad things that are happening in their life. And you go, is that real, or is that just what you do to try to elicit the biggest response?
Yeah, as I'm approaching somebody, I mean, I'll pray quickly, usually to ask God to help guide me through that.
Okay.
And I oftentimes, and God's given us this sense of discernment. I mean, it's a gift of the Holy Spirit, and so we navigate through those conversations to sense the legitimacy of the need. And the other thing is that I try to err on the side of grace. I mean, if I give somebody a couple of bucks or I give them an extra pair of socks or whatever, I mean, and they don't do with it what I intended, what's the difference? I mean, I showed them grace, right?
Right.
That's what I did.
Yeah, exactly. So we can't decide what the outcome's going to be. We can just offer love and grace. And a lot of the times they just want a little eye contact and a smile because everyone looks at them like they're just, poisoned. Yeah,
and that's one of the common things that I've heard over the years is just how how hurtful it is to go your entire day without people making eye contact with you. It's such a basic thing.
Yeah, I had an encounter just in the last couple of weeks, and I rolled the window down. I said, "How's your day going?" He goes, "It's tough. People don't even look at me. I'm a human being too." And that's what he said. And I thought, oh my goodness, talk about getting right to the point.
Yeah. How did that make you feel?
Oh, I just felt, it was hard.
Yeah.
I can choke up just thinking about it right now.
It's common, and we don't have time to talk about it now, but I mean, there are some reasons for that we can do a little work and a little preparation, and we can eliminate that from our course of actions if we're prepared.
A listener said, do you have volunteer opportunities evenings or weekends?
Must be somebody that knows that we serve breakfast really early.
Yeah, exactly.
Matter of fact, we do. And Bill, so there's a new blog post on my website that you mentioned there that when they pull it up on the homepage, there are some opportunities to pack hygiene kits, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and then complete lunches. And if people want to do that, there's some instructions on that page and some demonstration that shows how to do it, still respecting the guidelines that we've been provided to keep the folks safe. Also to do it with a good hygiene to prepare the food and the items as well, so that we don't harm our guests.
Yeah.
And I can move. This might be a bold thing, but I can move, I think, about as much product as your listeners can provide. So we've got people dropping off sandwiches, hygiene items all the time. And we formed a little packing event, and we talk about it on there. And there's a little video clip on one of the other blog posts. It just kind of shows how we did it, what we did. It was fun. We did it out in the driveway. We set tables up. We put X's on the driveway that kept people 6 feet apart, and we just had a little fun with it.
Well, I think, having a little bit of camaraderie and fellowship, with social distancing in place right now is, helps people's well-being. Right now, we're all looking for things to do where we feel a little bit more engaged.
So I'll issue a challenge to your listeners. There was one of the folks in my Bible study about a month and a half ago when this was kind of coming down, or 5 weeks ago, and he said, a Bible study. Well, what exactly have we been studying for, except for right now?
Wow.
And that was the point where we said, you know what? We need to mobilize. We need to get into action. And so our group, every single Monday night when we meet, we're doing some sort of a project. We're packing hygiene kits or lunches or sandwiches or something, and then doing a devotion after that. So every single week we're doing that together, because that's what we're studying for. We're studying for stepping into these needs. Yeah.
And then when the people show up for breakfast and they're homeless, do they get any hand sanitizer or anything like that they get to have a little cleanup before they eat their food?
Yeah, that's a challenge. It depends on where you are in the city. We're fortunate on the block that we serve on in front of Salvation Army Harbor Light, where there's a terrific ministry called Breakthrough Ministries, and they've done a really nice job. They're right next door, and they're still rehabbing their building, but while they're in the process of finishing that, they've been doing some meal services outside. And my understanding is that they're the ones that provided the porta potties and the hand sanitizing stations. So
nice.
Praise God for that ministry. Yeah, Breakthrough Ministries are great people.
Yeah, there's a lot of good people doing good things. Richard Bahr, you're one of them. Thank you so much for doing the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Bill. Appreciate it.
You bet. Richard Bahr has been my guest. His website is richardbahr.com.